I'm telling you, we never, in our risk management courses, we never learned about Maoist rebellions, earthquakes. I'm telling you, the risk management, the resilience of Nepali business leaders is unbelievable. I mean, Dolma, first of all, was the first girl to get a scholarship. Right. Dolma's a girl from a village called Bridim in the Langtang National Park. You don't need to change the environment to do what we do. I am ultimately optimistic about the ability for Nepali business people to build and grow businesses. We're working with all of the departments and trying to provide advice and trying to really showcase Nepal as a destination for foreign investment.
Namaskar, good afternoon to the New Businesses Show. Today we have our guest, Mr. Tim Gocher OBE. He is the CEO of Dolma Fund Management, which manages Dolma Impact Fund 1 and 2, the largest international private equity funds dedicated to Nepal. The funds with over $100 million assets under management, AUM that is called, generates over 10,000 well-paid jobs in Nepal through their investments in renewable energy, healthcare and technology. Tim is also founder and chairman of non-profit Dolma Foundation, which provides scholarship to underprivileged children in Nepal. Tim was awarded the OBE in the year 2022 Queen's Jubilee Honours List for the services to the British investment and economic development in Nepal. So let's welcome Tim. Welcome Tim to the show.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste. So how are you?
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Tim, please tell us about the story of how you got motivated to start Dolma in Nepal.
That's a long story, but I'll try to give you an abridged version. So, look, I came to Nepal in 2003 on my own trekking and simply fell in love with the country. And I think there's an inner peace here, obviously with the scenery, but also with the culture and the people. And it was something I was looking for at the time as a stressed businessman from London. And, I simply fell in love with it. It was the right place for me at the right time.
Right.
And I think it was the inspiration of the people that made me want to start working here. And at the time, it was the Dolma Foundation charity. If you think back, 2003 was the middle of the Maoist conflict. Right. So, it wasn't a question to bring investments at that time, but I started with charity and it grew from there.
Good. So, how Dolma operates or how it functions?
So, first there was Dolma Foundation, and there still is Dolma Foundation. So we've sent hundreds of children to school. We've rebuilt schools and a whole village of Bridim after the earthquake. I was living here then, so we experienced it together as a family. But then in 2011, I think what dawned on me was that the peace process was stable. And I think look across the world and try to point to me a more successful peace process. It's difficult. Possibly Northern Ireland. That doesn't mean the arguments stop. Right. It doesn't mean the politicians stop arguing and bickering, but it does mean the killing and the pain pauses.
Right.
And over time, people can heal. And by 2011, it was very clear that Nepal wasn't going to slip back into physical conflict. And then I thought, well, that's pretty much the baseline that a private sector investor needs. If my investment's at least not going to be blown up or taken by the Maoists, or, that's the sort of basic security that I needed. And that's why I started launching Dolma Impact Fund, a private sector investor fund, just to invest in Nepal.
Okay. So how does it operate?
Okay, so with any private equity fund, you have a fixed time frame.
Right.
So in our case, we have 10 years or 10 to 12 years. We can extend it. And the first fund was raised in 2014. So it took us 3 years to do that. And it was a very difficult process, because you imagine I'm sitting in front of investors in European capitals and I'm saying, I'm raising a private equity fund for Nepal. And they would say, that's interesting. What's the average rate of return on a private equity investment in Nepal? To which I would say, there's hardly been any private equity investments in Nepal, so I can't tell you. Maybe IFC once, or ADB and the Hyatt. That was about it.
Right.
And so the problem is not that Nepal is risky, it's just that nobody knows, or nobody knew how risky.
Right.
Nobody had tried it.
Right.
And so I managed to persuade a group of big institutional investors to take a risk. So 2014, we started investing. And you said I'm the CEO of Dolma Fund Management. That's a separate fund manager company which manages funds.
Right.
Okay, so the fund manager makes the decision which companies to invest in through that fund.
Right. Okay.
And, our first fund will be 10 years in September next year. So a year and sort of 5 months, 4 months.
The first fund, first impact fund.
The first fund. And we'll see if we have to extend the life of that fund. But really, we'd be interested. We've already started the process of exit from that fund. For example, 2 of our hydro plants are listed on NEPSI. And we hope to be able to sell at least some of those shares by the time the fund finishes. And now, of course, we have our second fund.
Yes.
And I think that was more exciting to me because we did have a track record.
Right.
We had made 8 investments from our first fund, and the investors could see how well they had done. In one case, we had a good exit. In another case, you can see how much the revenue had grown or the profits have grown. And so I felt that that was the ultimate validation that investors, international investors, would invest in us, in our second fund, because of the performance of the first fund. And that's not just Dolma's performance, that's Nepal's performance.
Right.
So for the first time, international investors have some data on the performance of Nepali companies.
So how is the performance?
It's highly confidential information. No, I mean, look, I can talk in general. So we've invested across, as you said, renewable energy, that's hydro and solar. So we have 2 hydro companies, both of which are now listed, and a solar company. We have a hospital and a pharmaceutical company, and we have 3 technology companies. 2 of them are in AI services, Cloud Factory and Fuse Machines, and 1 is in e-commerce, that's Sastadil.
Right.
So, how are they doing? Well, they're doing differently. Overall, the performance is good.
Okay.
The larger investments are doing well. The smaller investments are struggling, which means on average our performance is doing good. Of course, a lot of that's on paper. So what do we actually sell them for? But I think the point of having a portfolio in Nepal in its early stages of growth and investment is important, because you'll see energy stocks holding up in this economic downturn, but tech stocks might take a bit more of a hit. They're more sensitive to an economic downturn. So it also depends on where the economy is, the global economy as well as the local economy.
Right. Sometimes people get confused with the Dolma equity fund. Is it an NGO, charity, or private equity fund? Or what are the funding sources? These are the questions normally asked.
Yeah.
What would you like to answer?
Well, it's very simple. So we have a non-profit charity called Dolma Foundation. And that raises money from mostly individuals wanting to donate money to Nepal. So that's purely philanthropic.
Right.
And we give money and we don't want it back.
Okay.
Right? That's one thing. Then completely separately, we have Dolma Fund Management, which manages Dolma Impact Funds.
Right.
they are purely for profit.
Right.
In other words, we do want the money back.
Right.
And where do we raise the money from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the moment, it's mostly a group called Development Finance Institutions, or DFIs.
Mm-hmm.
So these are like FMO, BII from the UK,
Right.
Swedfund from Sweden, IFC, obviously a multilateral part of the World Bank.
Right.
And these are completely private sector, just like any bank or institution, but they can take more risk.
True.
So until we and others that they're investing in and the broader market can show a rate of return which is high enough to compensate purely private sector investors for their perceived risk of Nepal,
Mm-hmm.
then you really need DFIs to take that risk.
Right.
If we can be successful in creating enough returns, what our job, my main goal,
Mm-hmm.
is to bring in as many foreign investors as possible, whether
Right.
they're DFIs or non-DFIs.
Mm-hmm.
I want pension funds in the US and the UK
Mm-hmm.
to have an allocation to Nepal investments. But we're some way away from that.
So you mean to say that the funding sources you named are institutions whose motive is less commercial and more social, and what about the commercial private equity investors?
So I'm not sure that's quite right. I think their motivation is commercial,
Okay.
but in being commercial, it has the maximum development impact.
Okay.
Okay, let me try to explain that. If you take FMO, the Dutch
Right.
Development Bank,
Yes.
right? They're allowed to take more risk. They could invest in Nepal where perhaps a pension fund in London
Mm-hmm.
couldn't take that risk
Right.
because there's not enough data to measure the risk.
Right.
But it doesn't mean FMO want us to subsidize returns. FMO want us to achieve returns which will attract all types of
Mm-hmm.
private sector investors.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the international investment market, what's it made out of? Well, yes, some of them are these DFIs, which are largely sovereign government funded for profit. They don't want me to go easy on companies and just make a low return.
Okay.
The whole point is to post returns
Mm-hmm.
that attract all the other types of investors out there.
Right.
So how much money is out there globally in insurance funds, pension funds, asset managers, investment banks? And how much money does Nepal need to attract from abroad? Well, if you look at the SDG targets, maybe it needs $4-5 billion a year in total, of which about $3 billion a year needs to come from FDI, because
Right.
there's a limited source of capital here.
Yes.
So even all the DFIs put together are not going to invest $3 billion a year.
Yes.
So we need to attract those insurance companies, pension funds in the big financial centers, Singapore, London, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our work comes in,
Mm-hmm.
is if we can show, we and others that are working in sort of private equity and investment markets in Nepal, can show that companies can perform well enough, then I think the big investors will put their money in.
Right. In a cursory look, there are Dolma Fund, Dolma Foundation, Dolma Advisors, and Dolma Himalaya Energy, DHE. What were the reasons that they were, to set up as separate units, and how are they linked? Because for a novice, it's very confusing.
Too many Dolmas.
Yes.
So, Dolma, first of all, was the first girl to get a scholarship.
Right.
Dolma's a girl from a village called Bridim in the Langtang National Park.
Right.
And she was the first to get a scholarship. And after that, her family and that community so inspired me that everything's called Dolma. But they are completely separate. So obviously one is a charity, one is a private equity impact fund. But when we come across a business which doesn't fit that, for example, Dolma Himalayan Energy is a developer of large-scale solar and battery solutions in Nepal.
Right.
Now, as a private equity investor, we're not allowed to start companies. We're not allowed to manage companies. We invest, we help, we sit on the board, we provide advice, but we're not the managers.
Right.
So we saw an opportunity, especially given the seasonality of hydropower and how large-scale solar and battery could provide predictable generation for the dry season. There was no company to invest in. So if we find an opportunity that we're not allowed to do, then we might consider setting up a company like Dolma Himalayan Energy. So that's the only connection there is me, effectively.
Okay, interesting. So you have identified energy, healthcare and technology as your focused areas. How did you arrive to these conclusions?
So we did a lot. We spent 3 years with me and the early team, knocking on doors, speaking to businesses, trying to understand where the demand for capital is.
Right.
I think it's no surprise that energy was one of those requirements. Already, IPPs, independent power producers, the need for that was the time, of course, the big 16-hour load sheddings.
Yes.
So that was obvious. It's both impactful because it's renewable energy and it helps people run businesses. There's all sorts of impact, and it's needed. There's a capital demand. Healthcare, I think, is also pretty straightforward. There's not enough hospitals, there's not enough beds, not enough doctors, nurses for the population. There's not enough medicine that's manufactured locally. So I think, again, both the demand for capital and the impact is obvious. I think what surprised me, though, is technology. In a previous job in London, I was a venture capitalist, and I did not expect to find the kind of innovation and startups that I found here.
Right.
So in fact, our first fund ended up with, it's the biggest sector. Our 3 investments, Cloud Factory, Fuse Machines and Sastadil, we invested more than the total we invested in energy or healthcare.
Right.
And I think that's just a reflection, first of all, of the global speed at which entrepreneurship as a culture has swept through the world, the speed with which the technologies that enable that, the internet, broadband, the cloud, have enabled those business models to function, and also the innovation of the Nepali entrepreneurs, which have absolutely astounded me. That's been the big surprise.
I must ask you that, Nepal government has set aside the priorities, especially in few major sectors called agriculture, tourism and hydropower. Whenever you go in different discourses or seminars or in the government literature also you find. But you have not touched upon agriculture and the hospitality, tourism. What may be the reasons?
That's true. For agriculture, it's mainly because it's on the FDI negative list. So
yes.
Obviously, now not all agriculture, it's possible to do agricultural
in the processing and others,
but very often what you find is that a processing company would like to backwards integrate into some kind of farming to ensure its supply of sufficient quantity and quality. So it's quite difficult for us within the legal framework, and that's not a problem because I think there's plenty of investments for us to focus on. Tourism is just something we've always seen, or let's say hotels, always something we've seen as risky, and interestingly, so do our investors. In fact, we had to agree not to invest in hotels because they've had so many negative experiences in other countries. So in fact, we're not allowed to invest in the hotel sector, whether I like it or not.
Interesting.
But also you've seen, of course, you get something like the earthquake or the pandemic. It is very sensitive. And of course, it's also got huge upsides because of the tourism potential. But whatever I think, we're not allowed to invest in hotels.
You have identified energy, one of the main sector among other two. But now they talk about this climatic condition and more so the geographical, calamities, the earthquake and all that. Don't you think it is too risky in energy sector as well?
Because of earthquakes or because of climate change?
Both.
I mean, look, earthquakes, anything can happen. Life is uncertain, isn't it,
Yes,
Madan? Life
yes.
is uncertain.
Yeah.
But of course, what you do is you factor that into your engineering.
Right.
It's less of an issue with a solar plant. You know, your panels can break, but they
Right.
can be replaced.
Right.
Of course, it's much more of an issue with, some sort of dam or weir on a hydro plant. But, we know that there's an earthquake risk. We factor that into the engineering, obviously up to a certain magnitude. I mean,
Of
if
course. If
it's
everything
9.9, we're all, we're all
Gone,
dead
yes,
anyway. So yes, that's a risk. I think what's more interesting is the risk of climate change.
yes.
And it feels like a race against time. One of the institutions I enjoy spending time with is ISIMOD
Okay.
here,
Yeah.
who have been studying the specific effects of the Himalayan
Yes,
mountain
they have been,
climate change. And what's been really interesting is them pointing out to me that a lot of the melting of the glaciers is caused by black carbon deposits. In other words, just soot
Right.
with dirty cars and
Yes.
factories and lots of coal-fired power in India,
Right.
where all that soot just darkens the surface. So
Yes.
that's a separate effect from global warming.
Right.
Okay, it speeds up global warming.
Right.
And so it feels, for Nepal and the Himalayas more generally, for the glaciers, it feels like a race against time. Because imagine if we woke up tomorrow morning and there were thousands of megawatts on the grid, completely catering for electric vehicles, so you had no terrible fossil fuel exhaust.
Yes.
You didn't need to keep the coal-fired power in India on because we're exporting to India with clean energy, and we don't need to import and keep their dirty power stations on.
Right.
Nobody needs to burn firewood anymore. Imagine if that was the world tomorrow.
Right.
Well, there'd be hardly any black carbon.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So in other words, Nepal doesn't have the capacity to reverse global warming. That's a problem for humanity.
Right.
But it does have the capacity to reverse black carbon deposits.
True. True. True.
If we can stop, and that would happen tomorrow. If you woke up tomorrow and there was 40,000 megawatts on the grid, there'd be almost no black carbon deposits.
Right.
It would just take one winter's snowfall and those glaciers are white again.
Right.
Right? So it feels like a race against time. If we don't win that race, it's catastrophic. It's catastrophic for the glaciers, the floods, the landslides, what happens downstream in Bangladesh and India. But it's also catastrophic for our hydro industry. Of course, all of those snow-fed, glacial-fed hydros, you can forget your dry season power. So, we're signing PPAs of 30 years, but it's a very short-term effect.
Right.
So I really think it's in the world's interest, as well as Nepal's interest, to really energize and increase massively the investment in renewable energy here.
What a beautiful statement you talked about. Anyway, so what is DHE doing at present, and what is the status in its power storage project in Nepal Himalayas?
It's been a long and winding road, as Paul McCartney once said.
Yeah. Okay.
We got a license from the investment board, Dolma Himalayan Energy, in 2018. Two licenses, in fact. Unfortunately, one of those was cancelled after we'd started investing money.
Right.
Luckily not constructing, but at least feasibility studies.
Right.
We are still waiting for that license to be renewed on a different site. So that is, maybe 3 to 4 years since that cancellation.
Right.
I believe it's going to come up.
Why did they cancel?
I don't want to get it wrong. I'd say 2019.
Okay.
With the promise that if we presented a new site, that it would just be transferred.
Okay.
That hasn't been so easy.
Okay.
However, I do believe that in speaking with IBN, that will be going forward imminently.
Right.
And if it does, it will enable us, and I believe there's another project, some big solar project that wants to also install batteries. I think batteries and storage more generally is the key for the Nepali grid. Okay, it gives that flexibility. If you think of solar, it generates more in the dry season
Yes.
than in the wet season, which is exactly what
We
we want
need,
to
yes.
offset run-of-river hydro.
Yeah.
But the problem with solar is it jumps up and down within every, within the day,
Yes.
right? Plus, when do you need that power? Probably after the sun's gone down.
Yes, of course.
So if you add battery storage, which the price is coming down because of the huge demand for batteries in electric vehicles and other situations,
Right.
then you can smooth how much comes onto the grid when the sun is shining and store the electricity for the evening peak time.
Right.
You can also store the excess from the hydro after that's dispatched
Okay.
and put that into the morning peak.
Right.
So it makes the grid very flexible, especially when you're dealing with intermittent renewables. I don't think wind power, we haven't really looked at wind power here, but certainly for solar power, it's the holy grail for these intermittent renewables. So we want to be one of the first to install the battery flexibility with solar power.
Have you done any feasibility or any study on the wind power as well?
No. We have, there are fantastic sites, in the Himalayas, which are, very windy. The problem is just the physical access. These are huge, great turbines, maybe 30 meters, 50 meters in diameter.
Yeah.
Try to get those up the mountain roads. We haven't found a solution for that.
Okay. Dolma Impact Fund 1 of nearly $37 million was closed in 2014, I guess, and now you are working with Dolma Impact Fund 2. So please tell us about the story of struggle and success of Fund 1 and how it is going with the Fund 2. You mentioned a bit earlier, but if you want to highlight more in this.
Yeah. So, let me start with Fund 1. Fund 2, first of all, is fairly new. It's actually 2 years old, but we completed our final close, not allowed to raise any more money. And we almost reached, we'd said when we set out to raise the fund, we will not raise more than $75 million. And that's because you can have too much money, right? We're confident if it's $75 million that there's enough opportunities to deploy that capital in an efficient and hopefully profitable way. If we had $200 million, I'm not sure we know enough companies yet that we can deploy that. So we set a cap, and we raised the money during COVID. So pretty difficult fundraising environment. And we nearly hit that cap. We got to 72 million. And that's not, again, it's not just Dolma, it's Nepal that people wanted. That's what's driving the demand. So we were delighted. We've already made our first few investments. But if you ask me about the struggles and successes, I think, there's commercial struggles, right? So, industries have their ups and downs. Tech is the most, I said it's sensitive.
Yes.
When tech markets are up, we made an exit from Cloud Factory in 2019 when there was lots of venture capital money.
Yes.
We're still small shareholders, but we sold some of our stake. But if you went to venture capitalists now, that was an American transaction. If you went to venture capitalists now, they're scared, right? NASDAQ is down.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of struggles that you see. And that's the kind of struggles you see everywhere. It would be the same if it was company in London or New York. I think what's unique to Nepal is it feels like we're laying a path for the first time.
Right.
And so it's simply the delays involved in getting money in the country, getting licenses to do things. That's been perhaps the unique struggle of Nepal. And, to give you an example, the foreign direct investment to get approval can it's taken us up to 13 months since signing the legally binding document.
Yes.
And don't forget, our shareholders are almost all governments. So, it's the cleanest money available from a money laundering perspective.
Yes.
And also, each time we go for an application, they're the same. They haven't changed.
Yes.
Right. So we are one fund with the same set of shareholders.
Right.
So, I'll tell you one example which highlights the problem. Well, I won't say which company, but we committed to a high growth tech company. And it's growing so fast. These companies don't make a profit yet. They're in market share mode. And they're growing so fast, and it took so long to get the money in, they were going to go bust. Only because they were doing well, and our money couldn't come in. And I had to go into NRB and say, Governor, Deputy Governor, this company's going to go bust. Can I please get that last signature? And what it's like in Nepal, the first thing I would say is what an honor it is to have the kind of access and flexibility that you can go and meet the governor. That wouldn't happen in India, certainly wouldn't happen in London.
Yes.
Right? So, there are good things here. It might take a long time, but you do build relationships with the politicians, the bureaucrats, the central bank officials. And so you can solve problems, but the system does take a long time. And I think, unfortunately, when you look at foreign direct investment numbers, we see about 50% of money that enters the Department of Industry that applies not coming in the end.
Yes.
In other words, they give up.
Yes.
It's possible they're all money launderers, but I don't think 50% give up. And that is a shame. Whereas it is our job. We only invest in Nepal.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to get it through. We know the system, but unfortunately, it's such a trouble that I think a lot of people give up. Because by the time you've signed a deal, let's say you've agreed a valuation and you think there's a certain level of risk, well, 6 months later, that situation's changed.
Right.
So they're almost giving an excuse to the investor.
Sometimes when the law
pull
changes.
out. Absolutely. So a lot of struggles with timing to get the right licenses or approvals.
Let me ask you, sector-wise, how is the performance of units where you have invested? Which ones have gone public till now? And what is the plan for others? What is the exist plan for all these investments? Can you highlight on these issues?
Yeah. I'll take them by sector.
Yeah. Okay.
The energy sector has we've nearly proven the whole life cycle of FDI in hydro anyway.
Right.
So we invested in 2 hydro companies quite early on in the fund. That construction is now largely finished, or certainly 2 of the projects have commissioned. They've listed on the stock exchange. There's a very conducive environment. It's a tried and tested path. The NEA pays its bills on time. And, in just a few months, we'll be allowed to start selling our shares. Now, obviously, our profits depend on the market, and that's our risk. But I think we need to give credit to Nepal that it has created a whole industry ecosystem which is trusted. Right? If the NEA signs a PPA, it stands behind that PPA. The banks understand how to finance hydro. The engineering skills and the contracting skills exist here to build, with some expertise from abroad, to build those hydro plants. The stock exchange and the investment banks understand how to make those public and how to fairly share some of those returns and the allocations of shares with the locally affected community. And the last thing we have to do is sell some shares and prove that we can get the money out of the country.
Yes.
But I think, you think that's been going on for 30 years, the independent power producers. I think this is a real success story of Nepal.
Right.
And we're really excited because those 2 investments were the first FDI hydro investments that listed on the stock exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can, in the coming months, prove that we can exit and repatriate and make a profit, that's the kind of signal that those big investors that IBN are working on, will be very important for them.
So hydropower is the where you have.
Yes. So in other words, the stock exchange is your exit.
Okay. Okay.
Then with healthcare, there are local buyers. If it's a hospital, a pharmaceutical company, but I also think increasingly India.
Can you name these hospitals?
Yeah, the Nidan Hospital.
Okay.
In our first fund, and Chirayu Hospital on the north of the Ring Road in our second fund.
Right.
And Rhododendron Biotech is a manufacturer, the largest manufacturer of hemodialysis fluid for kidney patients.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So those are our sort of healthcare assets.
So how are they performing?
We've had COVID.
Yes.
Right. So during that time, of course, there was a brief period with an extreme spike in patients and revenue. It was desperate, highly stressful for the staff. And then, of course, you had a period of time where nobody wanted to go to hospital.
Right.
Because nobody wanted to catch COVID.
Yes.
And we're only now just seeing those numbers return.
Right.
So, I think in the long run, hospital assets are now, I would say, back to normal in terms of performance. But it's been a very difficult couple of years because of COVID. But it's just enabled us to redouble our efforts, seeing COVID, knowing how much Nepal needs that infrastructure, how much Nepal needs those hospitals, that we've stuck with our investments. In terms of the manufacturing of medicine, it's been a consistent performer and a fairly good performer. Rhododendron. Unfortunately, that's partly because the type 2 diabetes, which causes a lot of these kidney illnesses, continues to rise. But what's really good is to see it taking market share out of imports from India. So we've all seen the trade deficit. And, if we can have more of these businesses, which are import substitution businesses, they'll never make 100% of the medicine required in Nepal. But it creates quality in Nepal and stops more imports from coming in. So that's been more of a steady, good business. And of course, those were able to operate during the lockdowns because people still needed medicine.
So you got investment back from one party in a private deal.
Yep.
To energy sector companies are going public as it is
already
legal requirement for them to go to public. So what is the possibility of going public for other companies where Dolma has investment?
I think the most likely exit path for our tech and healthcare companies are either local investors, where it's companies like Food Mandu, Upaya. These are some of our Fund 2 investments. We have WorldLink, an investment in WorldLink, Sastadil. But you've also got foreign private investors. And I think particularly for healthcare and for some of the platform plays, Food Mandu, Sastadil. If you've seen Sastadil have an exclusive partnership with Flipkart, for example. So you can go to sastadil.com and buy your Flipkart or Myntra products. That doesn't mean Flipkart are going to buy Sastadil, but it's an indication of where that could happen. So I do think India, where it's developed obviously at a much higher scale, a lot of these platforms, whether it's third-party logistics, e-commerce, food delivery, the future may be in selling our shares to them or other developing countries where the scale is greater. And I think similar in healthcare, at least with hospitals. You see, for example, Apollo hospitals, they've branched out to Bangladesh, to Uzbekistan. And it's interesting for them to increase the quality, to sort of lend their quality to those countries, also to act as a feeder for more serious operations, which might happen in India. So we're seeing that business model, and I think there's an opportunity. But I will finish with one point, and that's of course, tech companies and, perhaps WorldLink might have a future on the stock exchange. It's a sizable company, but, a software-based company is not going to list on the stock exchange as things stand. But there was some very exciting announcements on Friday at the Startup Awards by New Business Age, which suggests that maybe there is a future for a sort of tech index for the Nepal Stock Exchange.
Yes. Dolma is known in the society for more for its investment in technology firms, known also as startups. So what is your assessment of Nepal government policies, behavior towards such businesses, and what is your suggestions on this?
I mean, I suppose other than fintech, the technology company regulation is, a general software company. It's not very regulated, right? It's not. Right. If it's fintech, yes, it's regulated by the central bank.
Yes.
So regulation has neither helped nor hurt a company like Cloud Factory. And I think it's important to split up the type of companies. We invest in two types of software businesses, one that export its services abroad and one which perform a service to the domestic market, like Sastadil, Upaya, Food Mandu, and WorldLink, I suppose. But in the pure software space, there hasn't been much regulation, and neither have we felt that the regulation there is a problem.
Right.
So it's neutral. I'll comment, though, on the export businesses, and I think this is less of a problem for the businesses than it is for Nepal. So where you have Cloud Factory, it started in Nepal, a company called Sprout Technologies.
Yes.
And of course, its customers are in America. So it needs to pay consultants, it needs to pay for software licenses, it needs to have salespeople. But the vast majority of employment is in Nepal. And they tried to do that from Nepal. And every time they made a payment, they'd queue up at the NRB and they'd get some signature. And they were late they were about to go under. Not because they didn't have the money, but they couldn't pay.
On time,
And because the rules at the moment prevent a Nepali company from having a subsidiary or any sort of bank account or share ownership abroad, they had no choice. The founder was a Canadian, he had the freedom to do it, was to set up a holding company, in his case in the UK. And what that means is that the profits, there are some profits made as they sell services to the UK, but the majority of the profits are, of course, booked abroad. And what does that mean for Nepal's export figures? It means that there's a huge growth in the export of services, but you can't grow those services without a sales company in America, Europe, or wherever your destination market is. And so I think there does need to be some allowance to have limited capital in a subsidiary vehicle, because that means the export numbers for Nepal have the potential to grow. And that is very important for the economy.
What sort of difficulties are you facing in investment in these type of investment businesses in which you want to invest? What reforms would make it easier? That is my actual question.
Yeah. I mean, the main one for the benefit of the country is an automatic route for capital from abroad. So if you look at India, or frankly, I think any other country I've ever invested in, you sign a deal, you send your money, and the receiving bank will check that money to make sure it's not money laundered or, dirty money. If it is dirty money and you can't answer the questions, they kick it back. But they get the money in the country. And similarly on the way out, as long as you've conformed with all of your paperwork and you are compliant, you're allowed to repatriate your money. I think having that many stages of checking and signature, which other countries don't have, simply puts Nepal at a disadvantage. So I think And it doesn't have to be every sector. It could be priority sectors. We've talked about agri, hydro, tech, hospitals, where you really need the capital let it in. I'm not saying don't check it, do what every other country does and empower the banks to check it. The central bank doesn't need to check itself.
Yes.
If I invest in the UK, the Bank of England doesn't check my money. Right. HSBC checks my money.
Right.
Okay. So I think that would be the most important thing. Because if you look at this year's FDI numbers, I heard the finance minister speak last week, and he said that so far this fiscal year, the total FDI is $34 million. So I've already mentioned that FDI for the SDGs needs to be something like $3 billion.
Yes.
So you're talking about 100 times the amount of FDI. Dolma itself is responsible for over $20 billion if you include our partnership with BII in WorldLink. Right. So just Dolma is 60% of Nepal's FDI this year.
Wow.
And I don't say that to boast how big Dolma is. I say that because that's a crying shame that the FDI figure is so low. Right. And with some simple reforms, really copying other countries like India, it could be a lot higher. And especially when you've got a downturn, a global downturn, and there's less money around, and investors are looking for excuses to pull out, to not take risk. This kind of thing really hurts. So I would say number one is automatic route. Some of the smaller things we've solved. And there are some in the bureaucracy who are real reformers. And again, this is where the informal nature of working with Nepalis in government is wonderful. Right. Sometimes you just meet somebody that wants feedback on how Nepal could attract more money. One of those examples is Sabon.
Yes.
First of all, the reason, by the way, we have invested over 20 million is because they shortened the lock-in period for foreign private equity to a year. So that gives us a lot more confidence in investing, because if we do list those companies, we can sell them within a reasonable period. Right. If that remained 3 years, it's very hard for us to invest in the first place. So that's just one example. And I was very interested in Ramesh Hamal's view on Friday at your event, that, the wish to create a different type of stock market for tech stocks that isn't based on asset values and book value, but is based on, technology. It would be a much more risky environment. There'd have to be a lot of education for the investors. But what a wonderful way to have a sort of smaller tech-focused stock exchange. So, we're working with all of the departments and trying to provide advice and trying to really showcase Nepal as a destination for foreign investment.
Wow. So, is there a conducive environment for private equity, venture capital, enterprise development in Nepal or not? That is normally frequently asked questions by the foreign investors. So, which you also may be, receiving these type of questions. So, do you see that the ecosystem for these to improve in Nepal? You have already explained a lot so far. Where do you see the light at the end of the tunnel, they say? I mean, do you see any light to change this environment?
You don't need to change the environment to do what we do. I am ultimately optimistic about the ability for Nepali business people to build and grow businesses. Don't forget, this is my business. It's my money too, right? Yes. You don't think I raise $100 million without them forcing me to put my money at risk too, right? Obviously. So this isn't a job. This isn't my job. This is my business.
Yes.
Right? So that's proof that I believe in this country, that I believe in the business community of this country. Could it be better? Could it be smoother? Could Nepal attract more capital? Absolutely, by doing the kind of things that, because the problem is not the businesses. The problem is not the people running the businesses. They could have better governance, they could have better training, but they're good. They're amazing. In fact, I I did a MBA
Oh,
20
yeah.
years ago, and I'm telling you, we never, in our risk management courses, we never learnt about Maoist rebellions, earthquakes. I'm telling you, the risk management, the resilience of Nepali business leaders is unbelievable.
Right.
And when you mix that together with what I've seen on the technology sector, I think you've got an amazing market which has far more scope to grow than a more saturated market. Growth rates in some industries are far higher. So I am very optimistic. And nothing will stop me investing in Nepal because that's what I want to do.
Okay.
However, what Nepal government needs to do is have an environment which can attract any type of capital, not just because the guy happens to be married to a gurung, but which is what I am, but a big multi-billion-dollar investor in London who doesn't necessarily love Nepal over one other country and wants to invest. That's the kind of environment. So it's not going to put us off. And I'm very optimistic about Nepal's business future.
Given the same legal frameworks and same type of mindset of the bureaucrats, do you still see that there will be flow of FDI in Nepal?
No, I don't think so. I think you've got years of data to prove that it throttles FDI. Even if you look at the delays of what, let's say it takes 6 months or a year, that's 6 months of employment that could have been generated, 6 months of providing hospital services, 6 months of those people that could have got that job not going abroad to take work. There's a massive economic effect on delay. Of course, cancellation, where people give up, that's not Dolma, but cancellation is much more serious.
Right.
So if you keep delaying and having multiple steps at the DOI and the NRB and other industries, if you keep doing that, Nepal will always have a tiny amount of FDI. And that's why Nepal ranks pretty much last in FDI per capita or percent of GDP, whereas it's the 50th largest country in the world.
Right. So these were a few questions that I had thought in my mind. Are there anything that I missed to ask you and you want to mention for our audience?
I would like to say that the New Business Age event on Friday was eye-opening on a few levels. First of all, we invest in perhaps the M of the SME, right? We don't invest in absolute small startups.
Right.
We invest in medium scale. We would invest between $2 and $10 million per time. So it's not the startup funding.
Right.
But we rely on new businesses growing.
Right.
And what I saw with the participants and the winners of the New Business Age Startup Awards is incredible talent, and almost unstoppable enthusiasm of entrepreneurs. And again, I come back to what I said earlier. It's an amazing global business culture. It started in California, but it's swept through the world like TikTok. Right? Entrepreneurial culture, and I saw it there. But the other thing I saw with the Secretary of Industry, the DG, the Swanim Wagle, Ramesh Hamal, are politicians and bureaucrats there to encourage, not to block, not to provide paperwork, but there to give speeches, there to sit on panels, there to announce some reforms which would help these startups. So it was such a healthy environment, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time and very candid answers.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.